What's up, football fans? Welcome to the Pigskin Prodigies Podcast. I'm Dan Wusso, that's Kevin Bargender, and today we're going to be talking about the NFL Draft, giving our reactions to the first round and also the Packers draft class. I know that I have a lot of strong opinions about some of the things that transpired over draft weekend. I'm sure you do as well, so we'll dive into both of those. But I want to start with the first round, our thoughts on what each team did, and the biggest reaches. Or actually, let's start with the positive side of that. Let's go with our favorite picks for the biggest steals of the first round. I thought there were quite a few good picks in the first round, definitely some questionable ones, and a lot of just okay picks. But Kevin, let's start with your thoughts on your favorite picks of the first round. Which teams, when they look back at this draft class, do you think are going to be most happy with who they picked in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised to see Brock Bowers fall all the way down to 13 to the Oakland Raiders, but tight end isn't a premium position anymore, really, in the NFL. And it really wasn't a position that the Raiders needed either. I mean, they just got a tight end last year in the second round. Typically, you don't draft two high round tight ends back to back, but it was good value, even though they needed a quarterback, and the quarterback had been taken a position before them in the draft. So really, the quarterbacks drove the talent down the board for players of his quality to fall to them. So that was really interesting. I've never seen it where like the top 14 picks in the draft were all on offense. That was, you were just thinking, okay, one of these edge guys are going to go at some point. But yeah, everyone just started falling. Yeah, like another guy, Dallas Turner, he fell all the way down, and then the Vikings traded up to get him. Thought that was pretty good value for a guy most people thought would be gone in the first 10 picks. That was just a fantastic value, and he's a little undersized, but he's not like a Preston Smith 6'6" guy, but I think he can definitely be effective in the league, and comes from Alabama, a really well-known school for producing defensive talent. So those are kind of two of my big steals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you on Bowers. He was my number 2 player in the draft. I absolutely love him. I think he's going to be like a top 3 to 5 tight end in time. I don't love the situation going to the Raiders with their current quarterback situation, but I think in time we'll really see what he can do. And even in his first year, though, like with what he can do in like the screen game and the short passing game, I still think he can be pretty productive. But definitely, I think the long-term outlook is probably going to be more optimistic for him than what he's dealing with in year one. Some of the picks that I like, though, in the first round, besides Brock Bowers, Troy Fautanu to the Steelers at 20. I know, I think the medicals are the reason that he dropped, so we'll have to see what happens with that, what the long-term outlook is for him. But just from like a talent standpoint, I absolutely love Fautanu at 20, and a value standpoint as well. I thought he was like the third best offensive tackle in the draft class behind Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu, and a top 10 player overall. So to get him at 20, if he's like good to go, if he's healthy, I think that's an absolute steal. Then a couple other ones that I really liked. The cornerbacks surprisingly really dropped in this draft class. I thought Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold were both going to go like top 20 or somewhere in the middle of the first round. They both drop outside of the top 20 though. Quinyon Mitchell going number 22 to the Philadelphia Eagles, and then Terrion Arnold going 24 to the Detroit Lions in a trade up just above the Packers. Maybe because they
Yeah,
feared the Packers would take him. So I thought those were good values as well. Um, and both really good fits for what both of those teams want to do. Quinyon Mitchell, really good off corner, off man corner, and then Terrion Arnold, perfect fit for Aaron Glenn's defense with his press man ability. So I think, yeah, really good fits, really good values for both of those teams. And then one more I would say is Rome Odunze to the Bears. I thought he was a top 5 player in the draft, and to me, the number 2 receiver in the draft. So to get him at 9, thought that was a good value, and just a smart pick in general too. I think to get a young receiver for your young quarterback to develop with for years to come. I think that's always a smart move. If you look at most of the young quarterbacks that were drafted high that end up being successful, typically they have a receiver drafted really high to develop with them. So I think that was just a smart move for them. And yeah, I guess those would be all of my the biggest, I guess, favorite picks and value picks of the first round. But let's go to the other side of that, the negative side of the first round picks. Who do you think were the biggest reaches in the first round?
Um, even one that I don't know if people consider a reach, but Xavier Worthy, I didn't really see him as a first round pick. Obviously, first round speed for sure, but undersized, underweight, I would say too. And I think they might see him as sort of a gadget player for the Chiefs and maybe a replacement for Tyreek Hill. But it just seemed like a guy that was probably more of a high to mid second round pick that went late first. So um, not completely shocking that he went in the first just based on his 40 time being the fastest of all time. People see that and think we got to get this guy no matter what, even though you're not running with pads on and they're not always running 40-yard routes every time. So I kind of was a little surprised that he went in the first round, but the Chiefs need a receiver, and he plays receiver, and they love those undersized guys that can fly. So uh, I guess it makes sense, but I just thought it was somewhat of a reach, even in the late first round. We saw teams like the Bills trade back to get out of the first round to take a receiver, and they still got a quality one. So it kind of doesn't make sense to me if you didn't get a top tier wide receiver to still draft one late in the first round. Even, I just didn't agree with that pick too much. Obviously, the Michael Penix one was pretty surprising because most people thought of him as mid to late first round pick. And for him to go in the top 8 was just completely shocking. I was confused and lost and thought, okay, the Raiders would be a more fit as just based on their needs. And, I thought for sure the Raiders are going to come away with one of these 6 quarterbacks, and they came away with none. So that was really surprising. I'm sure they felt pretty badly after the draft of, getting none of the top 6. And then once the top 6 went, the complete quality of the draft went. So that's why we saw them all mostly getting overdrafted, other than the top 3. Everybody else wasn't really projected to be that good, and they just all went in the top 12. It was just something. Even Bo Nix, we didn't. Some people saw him as a second round pick, so that was kind of a reach as well. Even though I think he's got some decent talent, I don't know. I really don't think he was a number 12 pick in the draft, but that was a position of need for the Broncos, so I can understand it, but just wouldn't be something that I would feel real comfortable as a GM taking the 6th best quarterback in the draft all the way at number 12. It's like, wow, it just flew. And I've never seen a draft like this, I don't think, ever. It was just really amazing to watch.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a draft like this either. I mean, 6 quarterbacks in the top 12 is absolutely insane. QB
Yeah.
6 going number 12 is just nuts. I was definitely confused by the Penix pick too. I don't really think it makes sense because they just paid Kirk Cousins a 4-year deal worth $180 million, and now you draft Penix in the top 8 to be your backup for the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, you can get out of Kirk Cousins' contract after like year 2 or year 3 at like a $12.5 million cap hit, but like that's not ideal if that is the best case scenario. And Penix also, he's going to be 24 when he makes or when the NFL season starts. Actually, I think like next week or in the next week or 2 he'll be 24. So then you're talking about not starting him until he's like 26 at least or 27, which isn't ideal. And I don't think he's a guy that needs to sit that long because he's a guy that started a ton of games in college. I think maybe he could sit like a year and that would be okay, but I don't really think he needs to sit 2 or 3 years. So I think that's kind of wasting his, prime years maybe a little bit too. So just all around. And also, I mean, if you look at the Falcons roster, it looks like they're built to kind of win now. And now that you have a really pricey backup in Penix, like it's harder to build the roster to win now. So I don't know. It like limits their ability to win now, and then I mean maybe it sets them up to be pretty good in the future, but like I don't know. Like
And I'm
I feel
worried
like they
too
should have
about
been all in now.
yeah, and I'm a little worried too about his injury history. I mean, he was pretty banged up at Indiana, stayed fairly healthy with Washington, but towards the end of the season got banged up, especially in the national championship game. A little bit worried about that part of it, but and he also left-handed quarterback. They don't typically do the best in the draft, or sorry, in the NFL. We just don't see a ton of left-handed quarterbacks. Not to say they can't work out, but it's just very rare to see them in the NFL. So, not trying to say he can't be successful, but it's really strange to see a whole. I mean, there's Steve Young, Tua right now would be a more current example, but you don't see a ton of like really ultra Hall of Fame quarterbacks that are lefties. So um, that's kind of an interesting design. But if he does have to play early, if there's an injury to Kirk Cousins, they got a ton of weapons with the Falcons. So I feel like he would be surrounded by a really good supporting cast, like he was at Washington. I mean, we saw, three really good receivers at Washington uh, that all got drafted. So I feel pretty good about his ability to thrive in this offense for sure if he would, get the call. But um, I think the Falcons are hoping he sits at least a couple years, and then maybe either Kirk Cousins gets hurt or decides to move on and retire. But they must not really trust that, and they must really want that insurance with Michael Penix early. There were other quarterbacks though that they could have gone. Bo Nix was still there, JJ McCarthy was still there. A little surprising to see them take him over them, but uh, definitely the oldest prospect of the bunch and probably the most experienced of the bunch as well. So um, I guess they kind of value that maturity over really anything else.
Yeah, Penix's injury history is another reason I didn't think he was going to go that high. I think he had like 4 separate season-ending injuries in college, and he's 24. So like, I thought he might sneak into like the end of the first round, but I didn't think he would go top 10. Honestly, that was a big shock. But talking about some of the other biggest reaches for me in the draft, besides Michael Penix, obviously I agree with you on Bo Nix. I thought he was more of a second to third round talent, maybe like a mid-level starter at the high end of his potential. So I thought that was a pretty big reach, especially at 12. And then also JJ McCarthy going to the Vikings at 10. I kind of viewed him a little bit above Bo Nix, but kind of in the same range, more of a second to third round talent for him as well. And then, although the Vikings, they desperately needed a quarterback, similar to the Broncos, I think that was just like a desperation pick, really. And then also, I think the 3 receivers that went in the last 5 picks of the first round, all of those were kind of similar to me, similar reaches. I think they were all like second to third round talents, and that's Ricky Pearsall. He went 31 to the 49ers. Xavier Worthy went 28 to the Chiefs after a trade up, and then Xavier Legette went to the Panthers. I think in a trade up as well from the first pick of the second round. I want to say. I think they
Yep.
swapped with the Bills.
hmm
So yeah, all of those picks were kind of questionable to me. I mean, fine players, fine prospects, just drafted maybe a round too early. But now I want to move on to talking about the Packers draft specifically, and talking about how Brian Gutekunst, the general manager of the Green Bay Packers, attacked the needs on each day of the draft. So Kevin, let's start with round one. Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle, Arizona, was the Packers' first round pick. How do you feel about the approach on day one of the draft for the Packers?
Yeah, it was a little different than most people thought that they would attack defense again, as they usually do over the past decade plus. But this time they go offense for the first time in a long time since 2020 draft. And I have no problem with it. It's just a little different than what we're used to. And they got a position of need for sure. And this guy can play a lot of different positions too. So it's not just offensive tackle. If he doesn't work out there, it's just not going to work out at all. He can always move into guard if that doesn't work as well. But yeah, I think just based on who is left on the offensive line, probably the best offensive lineman left, just based on talent and just proving himself. He does come off a pretty significant injury the year before, but um, maybe that was just a freak accident, and that
Yeah,
ACL is not a huge issue.
he
They
did
move
play
on
well
from
last
it.
season off that injury.
Yes, yeah, that's kind of what they're basing it off of. So I don't have a huge problem with the pick at all. I think that was a smart pick, safe pick, very safe pick. It wasn't the flashy pick we were hoping for, but um, we kind of knew they needed to address offensive line, didn't know when exactly, and they're a team that likes to wait until the third, fourth, fifth round to address the offensive line. So we kind of assumed that might be the trend here, but they had a guy they really fell in love with that is very versatile, and they took him. So I definitely don't fault them for that. I think it was a pretty solid and safe pick.
Yeah, I'm with you right there. I gave it a B minus. I think it was a pretty solid pick. It wasn't a super exciting pick maybe, but I mean it addressed the primary need. He was arguably the best offensive tackle available. I think him and Tyler Guyton were kind of competing for that spot on the best offensive tackle available at that point. But if you look at how the draft played out after those picks, the next offensive tackle went off the board at 55th overall to the Miami Dolphins. That was Houston's Patrick Paul. And the pick in Guyton, the pick that went after Jordan Morgan, went 29th to the Cowboys. So after that, there was a perceived really steep drop off in offensive tackle talent. So the Packers probably had to get one right there or right around there. They maybe could have traded back a few spots and still gotten either Guyton or Morgan. But if they traded back too far, they probably lose out on a guy that would be ready to start pretty early. And Morgan, I think, was a better fit for them than Guyton. I think he has more positional versatility and fits kind of the mold that they want more so. So I understand staying put at 25 and taking him there. But let's look at day 2 of the draft. The Packers had 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks. They used that first second-round pick on Edgerrin Cooper, a linebacker from Texas A&M. Then they went with a safety from Georgia at 58, Javon Bullard, with their other second-round pick. And then the third round, they attacked 2 more non-premium positions with running back Marshawn Lloyd from USC at pick 88, and then they also drafted Tyron Hopper, linebacker from Missouri, with pick 91. So looking at the day 2 haul, how do you feel about that? How do you think that Gutekunst address the team needs there in the second day?
Yeah, I guess now looking at it afterwards, it doesn't surprise me too much that the Packers took 2 off-ball linebackers. They love that position. It seems like, Quay Walker, first round pick. Most NFL teams don't see it that way. They kind of see off-ball linebackers as not having as much value. Packers definitely got the best one in Edgerrin Cooper. So I didn't have a huge problem with that. I was a little surprised when they came back in the third round and took Hopper, but they have a new defense they're installing this year, and they want 3 proven guys that can do it, and they got 2 of them, and they have Quay Walker is probably going to be the third of those 4-3 linebackers, and now you'll have some depth as well with Isaiah McDuffie. So it was a little strange to see that, but they just really need to get this defense right, I think, right away and not experiment around so much. They really wanted to help out the new defensive coordinator and just get things where he wanted them to be. Really happy with the Javon Bullard pick. That was a great pick in the second round. That's what I thought maybe would be the first second round pick was going to be at safety. They waited till their second round pick and addressed it. So that was kind of nice to get better value, I guess, but and also address a huge need at safety because they really had no one to be the number 2 guy at safety. So that was a concern that they waited until their third pick of the draft to get a safety, but it wasn't their only safety they got too. So that's a positive. And they love their Georgia guys as well. He'll be the fourth Georgia player on their defense that could be potentially starting. So we love the Bulldogs, and they're going to be a big part of the Packers defense next year. Running back, I know that surprised some people, but I just, based on A.J. Dillon being on a 1-year deal and not a very proven back at this stage in his career, I thought it was really imperative in the third round to get a running back. I wasn't sure who. I thought maybe a bigger back, but they kind of get AJ or Aaron Jones's replacement basically in Marshawn Lloyd, who's a similar size, a little bulkier, a little faster maybe, but really should be a pretty good player for them and really could push to be the number 2 back in this offense behind Josh Jacobs before too long. So I really did like their second day. I thought they could have gotten a few other guys on day 2. They could have attacked the cornerback position on day 2. They completely ignored it, so that was a little surprising. But 3 of the 4 picks were defense, so it was kind of nice to see them really attacking the defense again. Now, hopefully, it pays off, but I would probably give them like a B plus, I guess, for a day 2 grade. I liked it better than day 1, but it could have been a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of the things you just said. Edgerrin Cooper at pick 45. I like that pick. I mean, they did trade out of Kool-Aid McKinstry, and they maybe could have traded up for Cooper DeJean because he went 40. He went 1 pick before their original pick at 41. And they could have, maybe attacked that corner position there. So that's one thing that I'm questioning a little bit. And they didn't, and then the Packers recently did not pick up Eric Stokes' 5th-year option. So he still very much needs to prove himself. But I do like the player, Edgerrin Cooper, at 45. I think that was, I mean, if Eric Stokes plays, at a decent level this year and they re-sign him, and he looks like a competent starting cornerback, I will feel way better about this pick. Although, with that being said, I do like it. I do think Edgerrin Cooper was maybe the best off-ball linebacker in the draft. He brings, pretty much a pretty well-rounded skill set to the Packers. He can blitz, he can cover, he can make plays against the run. I do think that he kind of struggles to take on blocks, and sometimes he is a little bit over-aggressive and overruns. He takes poor pursuit angles or misses some tackles, but overall, I think if you can rein him in a little bit, maybe get him a little bit stronger, I think he can be a good quality starter for the Packers. And then Javon Bullard at safety. I really like how he fits in. He has a lot of versatility. He has the interchangeable safety qualities that the Packers are looking for. Can play strong safety, can play free safety, can also play some slot cornerback for you. Just a really solid all-around player and can kind of do a lot of the things that Darnell Savage did. Isn't the athlete that Savage was, but I think he's just a better football player and a higher IQ football player, just more fundamentally sound. So I think he'll be a really good addition, and he'll pair really nicely with Xavier McKinney as the other safety probably. And then looking at the third-round picks, Marshawn Lloyd, I think he brings an explosive element that the Packers did not have in their backfield. So I like how he adds a different dimension to the running back room. That's, I think, the biggest selling point for that pick. I do think he also adds much needed depth to the running back room because A.J. Dillon, I don't know how much longer he's going to be on the team. And last year when he had opportunities to step up with Aaron Jones out, he just didn't really deliver and perform to the level that you would expect a former second-round pick to perform to. So I think that was probably a good pick. He does really need to improve his ball security. That is a big concern with him. I think he fumbled once per 36 touches or something in his college career, which is an alarming rate. But I think that is mostly a technique thing because he tries to use his offhand a lot to break tackles and stiff arm defenders. So I think he just needs to change his technique a little bit to better protect the ball, and hopefully he can curb that problem. Also, at USC, he really didn't he wasn't really used in pass protection very much, so that's probably going to be a learning curve for him. And so that might limit his third down ability early on in his career. So that's another thing that he has to probably work on. But he is a third-round pick, so you kind of expect that. You don't expect a complete running back that can do everything in the third round. So and the Packers have Josh Jacobs already, so he doesn't have to start right away. So I like him as a developmental player and like a depth piece early in his career. And then Tyron Hopper was probably my least favorite pick for them. I don't think he's a bad player. I just think he was drafted a little too high. I feel like he can come in and he can be useful as a blitzer and maybe do some things in coverage. I don't know. I don't really know if he's a 3-down player right away. I don't think his instincts are the greatest, and I think he diagnoses plays a little bit slow. And as a tackler, he's just pretty inconsistent. He dives at ankles. He doesn't like wrap up and like run through tackles and and always come to balance as a tackler. So that's something that I think he really needs to work on. But like you said, the Packers are switching to a 4-3 this year. They need bodies at linebacker, especially after cutting Devondre Campbell. Just need a lot of help there in depth, and he can help provide that along with Edgerrin Cooper. So I understand it from like a need standpoint. Drafting him that high, I just didn't love the value there. But let's look ahead to day 3 now. Packers made, let's see, 6 more picks there in day 3. They had 2 5th-round picks, 2 7th-round picks, and a 6th-round pick, and a 4th-round pick. What did you feel? I guess what were your thoughts on the day 3 picks and how those address the team needs?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And originally they were going to head into day 3 with 8 picks, which is really crazy to think. But then they traded up a few times. They just didn't need 8 more guys. They didn't need a team of 13 rookie class to come in.
Mm-hmm.
We need more value over quantity, and I just feel like you got to pay all these guys too. So it's probably best we go with a little bit the undrafted free agency route for some of these positions instead of drafting them all. So I was happy they kind of got rid of some of their picks and ended up getting higher draft picks in the 4th and 5th rounds. But yeah, they go back to safety on right away on day 3, and so that was a little surprising. But I had a feeling they might double up at that position, and it just wasn't the guy I was really thinking at safety. So I didn't really know a ton about Evan Williams. It does seem like a quality safety and offers a little bit different dimensions than what Javon Bullard does, and maybe this allows Javon to be in the slot more and kind of be that nickel cornerback for them in certain packages. And then it kind of surprised me they went back to the offensive line and interior offensive line, which was a little surprised just based on the fact of I thought they had a few guys that could play currently on their roster in the inside, and it's not really a position that unless they see Monk as just a pure center, which I think he can do well, but he can also play on. You can play guard, he can play tackle, he can really play everywhere. So maybe they just kind of see him as the do-it-all guy, or maybe they see him as the replacement for Josh Myers, which I would be completely okay with that. I think Josh Myers has been a huge disappointment as a 2nd-round pick, and we just haven't really had a real solid center since Corey Linsley left, and that's been kind of the Achilles heel on the offensive line. So I don't mind it. It just was a little bit surprising, and I'm not exactly sure what their plans are for Jacob Monk, but if it is to replace the center, I'm 100% happy with that pick because I think that's definitely going to be a need next year if they don't re-sign Josh Myers, which I would kind of assume they wouldn't at this point, unless he has a really stellar 4th year here. Then Keaton Oladapo, that was a great pick. He was mocked to go much higher than the 5th round. He was like a fringe 2nd, 3rd, 4th round guy. So it was really surprising for them to get him at the end of the 5th round.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a little strange to triple dip at that position, but hey, if the value's there, I mean, why not? And you're really building depth too at that position, which they had none. They had really no depth. Anthony Johnson, I Jr., I just didn't think he was going to be in their plans for the future. He played okay at times, but he's another 7th round pick that just you don't feel real great about sticking those 7th-round guys out into those starting positions, and maybe he's, going to be on a second team guy. But yeah, I had no problem with them triple dipping, even though it was a little surprising to see that. Um, it just was a position of huge need and huge depth, and they just let everyone kind of leave in the offseason. So they're really resetting at that position. Travis Glover, I would anticipate they see him at tackle as well. But it sounds like he can also play anywhere except for center on the offensive line. So they really like their versatile guys. And, it's not a huge risk in the 6th round to take an extra lineman from Georgia State. So you just, playing at a lower level of competition mostly. But if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. And another depth guy on the offensive line, hopefully, not starting right away, but they're really building that offensive line, it seems like, and they just love drafting linemen. I know they didn't take any last year, but for was like 2 or 3 years they took like 3 in a row, or they took 3 every single year,
Yeah,
and
something
it
like
just
that, I
was
think.
like okay, and it didn't really work out the best. So they do it again this year, and it should work out better just because based on the fact that if it doesn't work out at a position that they primarily play, they can always move them somewhere else. So it's an interesting strategy, but I don't mind it. And then Michael Pratt falling all the way to almost the end of the 7th round was really surprising, just based on he did so well at Tulane, and it just played really well against good competition. So, a guy that's got a good head on his shoulders, he's got a decent arm. I would thought for sure would be more like a 5th-round pick, but fell all the way to the end of the 7th round. So I think the Packers get great value there. They said Brian Gutekunst says before the draft that they wanted to get a quarterback to drive that competition. I really don't know if Sean Clifford's the answer at backup quarterback, especially if there's an injury. I don't know if he's ready to start, and it doesn't hurt to get somebody that can push him other than an undrafted guy or a street free agent. That doesn't that doesn't inspire any confidence in me. If there was an injury, we saw how many injuries there were last year in the league at quarterback, and the Packers dodged a bullet last year by not getting their starter hurt. But if that would have happened, who knows how the season would have went? It could have went terribly bad. So, I thought it was very smart to at least a quarterback, and maybe even pick up a street free agent too after the draft to kind of ensure that there's some quality in that number 2 spot, because it's a long season, 17 games, 18 weeks, plus the playoffs. If you're going to make it that far, there's a lot of opportunity for injuries, and now they're even considering adding an 18th game. That's something that's been thrown out there. I don't think it's in the near future, but that's you're adding basically 2 more games onto a 16-game season that wasn't too long ago. There's a really good chance that your starting quarterback's probably going to get hurt at some point during that 18-game stretch. So, yeah, I think really good value. It's don't feel great about having basically a second-year player in Clifford and a rookie at backup quarterback. But at least they have something there now and some depth. And I would assume they'll probably take both of them into the season on their roster. They might not with Pratt. Maybe they'll just stash him on the practice squad. But I think he would get a quick call up if something happened to Jordan Love. So at least they have some competition for the number 2 job, and they're not just giving it to Sean Clifford. I think that's really smart. And then with their final pick, getting Kalen King, the position I thought they would address way sooner. The value's great. He was a guy that was projected to even go as high as the 1st round in some mock drafts a year ago, and he had a rough season at Penn State, a rough Senior Bowl, and not a fantastic combine. So he ended up almost going undrafted, and I was kind of surprised to see the name come across the bottom of the screen. I thought, oh, he didn't get picked earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's a guy that really I think could even make the team pretty easily, just based on the Packers don't have a whole lot of depth at corner right now. they just didn't really go sign anyone and just kind of let some guys leave in the offseason. So I'm really happy with that selection. Wish they would have maybe even doubled down on that position, but overall I really liked day 3, at least the end of day 3. I think the 5th through 7th rounds were really good. I really like some of the value they got in each round, especially the 7th. I thought they really knocked it out of the park. So I'd almost give them like an A- on day 3 because they're some guys that could potentially start in the near future and are really going to contribute a lot.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you on everything, Ken, on the day 3 picks. I guess I'll just go through them one at a time. So Evan Williams, trading up for him in the 4th round, I thought that was a little bit rich, but he does add competition at safety, which was much needed. And I do think he'll be at least a good backup, especially at strong safety. And he'll definitely contribute on special teams. I think he could be a really good special teams player. As for the 5th round, they got Jacob Monk, the guard center from Duke, and then Ketan Oladapo from Oregon State, the safety. I really liked Oladapo especially. I think he is going to add a lot of depth at safety. I think he could even start possibly at strong safety if they decide to play Javon Bullard more in the slot and kind of shore up that position that way. So I think he could see the field a decent amount as a rookie and in the long term as well. And Oladapo is an excellent run defender. He can blitz really well. I think he can cover tight ends and man coverage and play in short areas, especially coming downhill. I think he's especially good coming downhill. I'm not sure, like in deep coverage, how he is. I didn't really see a whole lot of that from him at Oregon State. So that's a little bit uncertain for me, but what I know he can do, I really like. So I think he's probably, to me, the biggest steal maybe of the Packers draft class. Oladapo there in the 5th round. And then Jacob Monk, I think he just adds depth to the offensive line. That's a position that I think you always want to draft every year just to keep developing guys because it's so hard in the NFL to have depth on the offensive line. So that's a position that I always am looking for the team to draft, especially on day 3 when you typically have quite a few picks. The Packers always seem to have like 6 day 3 picks, so I'm always a fan of stocking up on the offensive linemen, getting guys to develop. And they've done such a good job of developing day 3 offensive line picks when you think about guys that they drafted in the 4th and 5th rounds, especially J.C. Treader, David Bakhtiari, T.J. Lang, Zach Tom. Who am I forgetting?
Corey Linsley.
Josh Sitton. Yeah, Corey Linsley, that was the other one. So yeah, they've done such a great job. I don't know if Monk's going to be as good as those guys. I hope so. Hope he'll be as good as any of those guys. But at the very least, I think he will add depth at center and guard, which they could definitely use. So I'm satisfied with that pick, personally. But then you look at the 6th round, they took Travis Glover, the offensive lineman from Georgia State. I haven't seen his film, so I don't have a strong opinion of him. But he does have good size. He's started a lot of games, I think like 58 or something like that, a ton of games in college. So he has experience. He's got size. He's a solid athlete from what I've read of his testing numbers. So, I mean, and then just from a philosophical standpoint, like I said, just love drafting day 3 offensive linemen to develop any year at all, no matter what the state of the position looks like. But then getting into the 7th round picks, I like both of those. I like Michael Pratt, the quarterback from Tulane, and Kalen King, the cornerback from Penn State. Pratt, I think, like you said, I think he could have gone a round or 2 higher, probably in the 5th or 6th round. He slides all the way to the 7th. So I like him as a developmental backup. I think I could see him developing into a solid 2nd string quarterback down the road. I think that would be the best case scenario for him. So I do like taking a swing on him in the 2nd round. And then Kalen King, I like him a lot as a reclamation project. If you look at his 2022, he was a 2nd-team All-American. He was so much better in 2022. Then this year, he really fell off super hard. So, I mean, if I was just evaluating him on this year's film, I would be like, don't love the pick. But if you look back at his 2022 film, he was much better. He he had the film to justify going a lot higher than this a year ago. So if you can get him playing closer to the 2022 version of himself, this could be a tremendous value pick in the 7th round. So I'm a fan of it because of that, because of how well he played 2 seasons ago. And I think, I mean, it was kind of the same thing with Tyron Hopper. I think he was quite a bit better the year before as well. And we've seen that before with some Packers picks, like Jordan Love as well. Was not very good his final season at Utah State, but was good the year before. So everything counts, in the college film. And you hope that guys like King and Hopper can follow that trend of Jordan Love developing after not putting on a great, performance his last season of college. But now getting into the next topic here, let's talk about rookie impact this year. How many of these rookies in the Packers draft class do you think will start right away? And how many do you think will contribute in any meaningful way as a rookie?
Yeah, I mean, I've got 5, so that's half the draft class almost. I think Jordan Morgan beats out Rasheed Walker at left tackle, Edgerrin Cooper, natural fit to start right away with us having no linebackers. Javon Bullard going to start. You just don't have any other safeties on the roster. Looking a little further, Tyrone Hopper, that he's probably going to start as well, just based on no depth. So you're going to have 2 rookie linebackers out there. It's kind of different. We don't typically see that for the Packers. They did it last year with tight end, but these are 2 starting guys, so that's a little different look. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how they grow together. And then looking a little bit further down, the 5th guy, I really think even Jacob Monk could supplant Josh Myers this year. He just hasn't played that great. So I think that's kind of another guy that's going to probably come in and start. So I know he's played, and he also played on the same offensive line as Graham Barton did, 2nd round pick that a lot of people thought maybe even the Packers would take. So Duke had a great offensive line last year. They ended up having some quarterback injuries, and that kind of derailed their season, but they had a really solid offensive line. So the Packers get one of the 2 best guys in the draft. And so I was really kind of pleased that they finally drafted some guys that are probably going to contribute right away instead of just drafting for depth like they typically do. Last year, they didn't have much of a choice with tight end, but this year they really didn't have much of a choice with linebacker and safety. So extremely glad that they attacked those positions. A little surprised still that they didn't go after any D linemen or any corners earlier, at least. So because that was a position that, even corner, if they would have taken one early, you could have seen somebody starting there. So, but yeah, I could see up to 5 players potentially playing right away.
Yeah, for me, I think there's probably at least 3 guaranteed starters in that group. When you look at the first 3 picks, Jordan Morgan, Edgerrin Cooper, and Javon Bullard, I think you can probably pencil those 3 guys in as starters right away for sure. And then Tyrone Hopper, like you said, I think just because they are switching to a 4-3, he might be almost a starter as a rookie, even if he may or may not be ready to, just because of the lack of depth that they have at that position. But other guys that I think will contribute this year, maybe not as starters, but that'll have some kind of role. Marshawn Lloyd, I think he'll be in that mix with A.J. Dillon as a change of pace back. I don't know. He might be the number 2 running back this year. He might work his way up to that. But he'll at least be the number 3, and he will be a factor because he adds an explosive element that A.J. Dillon definitely doesn't have, and Josh Jacobs doesn't quite have. And I think as a pass catcher, he shows a lot of potential. He wasn't really used as a receiver much at USC, but if you watched him at the Senior Bowl, he was pretty impressive running routes and tracking the ball over his shoulder and making nice catches. And he showed some things as a screen receiver, primarily at USC as well. So I think he could be a factor as a receiver for the Packers. And then, what's the other point I want to make? Oh, yeah. And then, like I said, I think Oladapo can work his way in as a 3rd safety at least. Possibly make make some starts at strong safety. But I think it'll be Bullard and McKinney as the starting safeties probably. But I do think Oladapo will contribute as a third safety probably, and maybe a special teams player as well. And then obviously Pratt. I don't think Pratt's going to play this year probably. So
hopefully not.
Jacob Monk. I don't know if he'll play either unless there's a bunch of injuries. But I like his potential down the road as maybe hopefully a solid starter in the future if Josh Myers doesn't get better. And then let's see. Oh, Evan Williams. I kind of jumping around here out of order. I probably should have just gone in order. But Evan Williams, I think he'll play this year. He'll be a special teams contributor and probably a backup safety. So he'll see the field some just because they don't have a ton of safety depth, like proven depth. So he'll be a factor as a backup probably, and a special teams player. And then Travis Glover, I don't think he'll really play this year unless there's injuries, similar to Monk. And Kalen King, I don't think he'll really play much at corner unless they're ravaged by injuries. But I do think he'll contribute on special teams. So, that's 8 players that can contribute this year and 3 or 4 that can start. So I feel pretty good about that draft class when you consider how much instant impact that they might potentially get from it.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. Usually like I said, we're drafting for depth a lot and looking to the future. So it's kind of nice for them to address the present for once. And, I guess you could say Jordan Morgan could be a depth piece if they, go status quo with what they had last year on the offensive line. Then he would be a backup. But if they see him as a potential starter, then yeah, definitely that's a present pick for sure. So yeah, the top 3 picks are probably all going to really contribute this year in a big way. So that's really encouraging to see. And then also they built the depth too, so they could do a little bit of both. So I really like the draft and some of the potential picks in the 7th round with Michael Pratt. Maybe one day he's a starter down the line. And Kalen King, yeah, he could potentially be a really solid number 3 or maybe even number 2 corner at one point. So, he wasn't, like you said, it wasn't too long ago that he was viewed as a really high round pick. So I think the potential's there. But, just having a poor showing, the recency bias of a poor showing, that kind of hurt his draft stock. So, yeah, definitely an interesting draft. Also, not taking a wide receiver, not taking D-line, waiting to go in a corner until the 7th round. Some interesting, strategies there. But, they can always do that next year or draft or get someone in free agency that they feel like is better than who is still on the board. And there was a huge run on wide receivers early as well. So there wasn't a ton of quality guys left. And, same with defensive line. There's a lot of edge rushers in this draft, but just not a lot of defensive linemen early on, or even really quality throughout the draft. And then, corner, they just didn't feel good about any of their guys that were really there until, I guess, the 7th round. So that was kind of the position I was really not happy about them passing on mostly. I felt okay about their defensive line, based on who they have. They drafted a couple last year, so I'm okay with them passing on that position. But corner just seems like a position that's going to be a huge need starting in 2025. I feel like I just don't know how many of these guys on the 1-year contracts are really going to come back. So it'd be nice to start developing those guys this year instead of looking to next year. Okay, well, now we have to draft a starter. So, but overall, yeah, I'd probably give this draft a B+, and you're definitely getting some starters in this draft no matter what. So that's a good thing, and you're not just drafting only based on best player available. You could do best player available for a need. So I really like that strategy this year.
Yeah, when I look at this draft, they did address basically all the needs that I thought they would. So I was satisfied with that. I just thought they maybe should have drafted a cornerback higher. That's my main gripe, like you said. So we have two more topics here. I just want to go through these kind of quickly because we kind of ran longer than I anticipated. I already talked about the first one a little bit, so I'm more interested to hear your thoughts on it. And that is, who do you think is the biggest steal of the Packers draft class? For me, it was Ketan Oladapo, the safety from Oregon State. But what are your thoughts on that?
I'm probably going to go with Marshawn Lloyd. He was potentially going to be on some people's big boards, the number one running back available, and they got him, pretty late in the third round. I thought that was really, really good value for a position that, we didn't need a starter necessarily, but you have to have two guys at least, and really ideally you have three. So, you need. They tried to do two last year. It just didn't work out the greatest. And with the injuries to Aaron Jones, now they're down to just one running back. So I think it was really smart to get this position of need and then get some really good value in the third round. And, even if it doesn't work out, it's like, okay, well, it's only a third round pick. It's not the end of the world. And you can always get a guy next year in arguably a better NFL draft class for the running back position. So I really like that pick, and I think that's going to really pay dividends in the future. So definitely my steal of the draft.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, who is your favorite Packers pick overall in the draft? I would say Javon Bullard. I think he's versatile, just a fundamentally sound player. He's just going to be like a steady starter, I think, for years to come. But who do you think was the best, or who is your favorite Packers pick, I should say? Who do you think will be the best, or who do you just like the most, or who are you most excited to watch?
Yeah, I would say Javon Bullard as well. I think he probably could have even been the first, second round pick of the two picks they had. So, really excited to see him. He's going to start guaranteed pretty much at this point, and we're going to see a lot of him. So, always love seeing the Georgia defenders on the team, even though it hasn't paid off a ton yet. But another guy with a great pedigree, and I think that's going to be really fun to see him finally helping impact the Packers safety position in a positive way. And it was such a weakness last year. I was really surprised they ran into the season like that. But at least this year they admit the mistake. They let those guys go. They go get Javon Bullard. Definitely a guy that I was really happy when I saw his name come across the screen. I was like, okay, yes, like finally they do something that I was kind of hoping. That not the number one safety in the draft class, in my opinion, but a guy that definitely is high on my list. So really happy that they finally got a guy that we needed and that I liked. So that was really kind of a fun pick for me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch the defense this year and see how Xavier McKinney and Bullard pair up, and should be exciting. And now they have some different skill sets at safety too, with Oladapo and Evan Williams and Bullard and McKinney. So that'll be interesting to see how they kind of utilize those different skill sets and who starts where and how Jeff Hafley schemes up this defense, because we haven't seen it yet. And there's a lot of new players coming in. But that concludes everything that we wanted to talk about regarding the NFL draft and the Green Bay Packers draft class for this podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us next time.